having the pleasure of having in our presence Dr. Williams. For those unaware, Dr. Williams is an Africologist, expert in historical and present experience of Africans and African descendants throughout the diaspora. Dr. Williams, what's going on?
How are you? Thanks for having me here today.
Been glad to have you here. First question I would like you to share your wisdom on is the myth that slavery was almost non-existent in the North.
There's a really good book called Complicity. It's by Anne Farrow and a few other of her colleagues. And what they do is explore that myth. And they look at the role of the Northeast seaboard and its role in slavery. And they start Philadelphia, New Jersey, New York, all the way up to Connecticut and Rhode Island. That actually, they were the breadbasket for enslavement. And during the Revolutionary War, when the British had an embargo on the East Coast, thousands of Africans starved to death in Jamaica and through the islands because they couldn't get food. Philadelphia was famous for what they call refitting. That's taking a ship and refitting it to put captives in.
Do not get a consolidation loan until
layers in the bottom of it. And, New York was a major trader because at that time you had the Dutch in control. So, yeah, you had slavery all over the East Coast. And Pennsylvania, the myth about the Quakers and William Penn. Well, some of it's semi-true. William Penn at first said that he didn't want slavery in the colony. But however, due to the demands of farming and other things, he caved in and said, okay, maybe indentured servants. So her first 175 black people into Philadelphia were actually enslaved by the Quakers.
I read somewhere, I don't remember right,
okay.
They were saying that about 40 cents of every dollar from slave owners went to the North.
Yeah, because what the North also did was they provided materials to the South, okay, like tools that they needed, and also luxury items, things for their home, all types, and their children some of them were educated in the North, and different foods, different luxuries that they wanted, all came from the North. So they were hand in hand. South was hand in hand with the North in the enslavement of African people.
Did the myth circulate because the North wasn't so hands-on because they had somewhat of a distance? That's why they justified and tried to say that they weren't as active in slavery as they were?
I guess it's the numbers. Get the numbers. So, in the South, like in the 1700s, in some places in the South, you had blacks 100 to 1 outnumbering whites. But you didn't have that in the North. You didn't have those large numbers. Like I said, like Philadelphia, the first, 175. And so the numbers were small, even though in the farming areas, so you could purport that myth or say that you weren't involved, but they definitely were here.
There has been disdain among some African Americans towards Africans, right? Believing they were responsible for selling them into slavery. While this may be true in some cases, it's not the full story. For example, I saw on your website, 1787, is his name King Al-Mami? All right. He passed a law making it illegal to take enslaved Africans from his kingdom and even return gifts from French slave traders that were meant as brides. Can you discuss the complexity of African involvement in the slave trade?
Right. Well, first thing you have to think about is we're talking 400 years. So over 400 years, there are many nuances. Okay, so you can't really encapsulate one period and say this is what happened. However, even according to one of the most conservative African-American historians, Henry Louis Gates, his number, I don't know how he comes up with this, said that 40% of Africans were complicit in the slave trade. Okay, so all right, even if we take his 40%, we have to define what does complicity mean. So yes, yeah, at the beginning there were negotiations, there were warfare between different ethnic groups, and people were captured, and those captives were sold or traded into slavery. But like as you get into the 1700s, those Africans who resisted were forced. Chiefs were either killed or they were banished to other islands. There's a story I just heard about where one of the kings was banished to Barbados. Yeah, and so they were forced after a period of time to engage in this. And one thing I really point out in my map on slave revolts is that the majority of the ship revolts, 70% of them, happened along the west coast of Africa, which testifies that Africans were trying to stop the trade as they were battling right there at the point of embarkation. So yeah, so there are many stories involved, and then knowing Europeans. There's many stories where the Europeans instigated rivalries between different ethnic groups to get them to fight, in order to get captives, because it was big money in it. It's like a drug trade.
And what's wild is it seems like they do the same exact tactics now with neo-colonial in regards to this conquering divide. And I think some people separate that tactic as if it's a new tactic, and they haven't been using this tactic.
Right. What was it? Bishop Turner in the 1870s said, "Do not trust the white man; he will betray you." Yeah, so I mean, we're dealing with the same element. Years ago. Don't do anything for money. It's just merciless.
There's another myth I want to talk about, that Africans were docile on plantations, right? But history records over 400 major revolts, please correct me if I'm wrong, excluding countless acts of resistance that went undocumented. How has history perpetuated the false idea that enslaved people accepted their fate without resistance?
Yep, it's called the Home Equity Agreement.
I always say that the South lost the Civil War militarily, but they won ideologically. And the myths surrounding the nature and character of Black people emanate primarily from the South, as Black people being criminals, criminalization of the race, as you said, the docility, the ignorance, the genuine acceptance of slavery by these people. And again, we talk in a couple hundred years. So at different points, you're going to see different activities. Like you'll see a peak of revolts, like in the 1700s, mid 1700s, all the way up to the 1800s, into the end of slavery. Well, what happened those first 200 years? Well, number one, people were dazed. They were traumatized. They didn't know what was going on. They're torn from their family. They're coming, and then by the time you get up to the third generation, you did have some Black people that accepted their fate. They believe, hey, I was a slave, I'm a slave, my parents were slaves, my grandparents were slaves. That's all they could see. They could not see it. If you would have asked a Black person in 1800 if they thought they were ever going to be free, they would say no, right? They didn't see it. It's just like when we ask Black people today, you think you're ever going to get reparations? No, you can't see it, right? That was their fate. So you're going to have all kinds of stories, but I believe resistance took place every day in a number of different forms. Slowdowns, poisoning. You notice in these old movies, before white people got ready to eat, they always had a Black person taste their food first. Fires. That's a big one. Setting things on fire. New York almost burned down. Montreal, they would just burn. Of course, killing the masters, having these revolts. So they were running away. There are many, many, many forms of resistance. But we're taught in order to perpetuate our inferiority and subordination to white people that in general we are lazy, docile, and accepting of our condition. You know, that's just to maintain us. But Black people fought from the very beginning. And I have on the map 263 revolts on land. Those are documented. Now the problem is these are the ones that are documented in English. Okay, but remember we got the Portuguese, we got the French, we have the Dutch. You know, so yeah, doing research in those languages in those areas, we could uncover many more. Also, remember the whites did not want blacks to find out about the revolt. So a lot of the information is not publicized. So it's not, they didn't put it in newspapers. So it's a process of uncovering, which I look at this project as ongoing. And everywhere I go, I try to go to the museums, talk to people to see if I can uncover more revolts. And Eric Taylor in his book, If We Must Die, he documented 500, this is just English speaking, 500 revolts on ships. All right, so there was probably, 10 times that amount. And it was because of those revolts that we actually have the end of enslavement. And, the history we're taught is, it was the white abolitionists who freed us. That was a part of it. But the major part were those revolts. They were expensive, people died, people were afraid, they had to come to some consensus.
How empowering was it for you when you started to learn about these revolts?
It was very empowering, especially the women, and I always get asked, what about the women? To see, what they came up with and the lengths they went through to have these revolts. It was just amazing to me. And I started the project being an A-level historian. Because I'm really truly a political scientist, but I really thought I knew a lot about history. But I just learned so much, and I think one thing that also empowered me in a kind of perverse way were the punishments. To see what they went through and the trauma of watching people being buried alive and one bone broken at a time and whipped 700 times. And what did that do to our ancestors?
Putting together
why would you put yourself through that? Their stamina there to even take the risk. They were like, I'm not doing this. So yeah, it was very empowering. But then at some points I had to back off. It got a little much for me.
Can you speak about Solitude out of Guadalupe?
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Resistance.
Yeah, that's a good one. 1802 in Guadalupe. There was a woman, Solitude. She was about 30 years old, and she was visibly pregnant. So we could say maybe she was about 7 months pregnant. She, along with a military man named Delgras, planned a revolt. What they did was they lured the French into a fort and blew it up. And 400 Frenchmen were killed. And all her people were killed. But she was captured alive. And once the baby was born, it was given to her master. And then she was executed in their language, unimaginable ways. Mm-hmm.
The thing I always wonder about when I read and learn about these things is the psychology of white people in regards to what mind state can you be mentally, and even what level are you at spiritually to do this to another human being. Even if you don't consider the human being a human, why would you do it to an animal anyway? Like, I don't want to harm any living creature to that magnitude. It may just be me, but like, when you learn about these things, like, what do you learn about their mind state and the
I I don't. And people do DNA studies, and they say if you look at the human body, you look at a white person, black person, genetically we are the same. And I think we're different. We are really different. But then also you have to understand the historical circumstances that white people came from before slavery and what was going on in Europe and all the warfare and
very harsh and desolate environment.
Yes, and the environment. And so they come from this warlike state. Not saying now, not letting Africans off the hook because, Africa, there was warfare, there was a lot of competition. There was, in Benin, we see that some of the kings were buried with their wives. And, so there were atrocities on both sides. But, I can't explain it. There's a line out of the movie Pulp Fiction when Ving Rhames says, "I'm going to go medieval on you." Remember that line? And that's what they did. Because I would look at some of these punishments and I would think, why did you even think of doing that to someone? Putting a metal plate on somebody's face so they couldn't eat, couldn't talk, starved to death. What? Chains around their neck so they couldn't lay down, bells on them so you could hear everywhere they go. It's just unbelievable. I can't explain it.
And this is the thing I struggle with also is that I understand psychologically they dehumanized, right?
Right.
Identify them as animals.
Right.
But you were aroused sexually by it, and there are a lot of sexual interactions and relationships. So that's the part I can't figure out in regards to, like, I know you try to justify it on paper, but, like, you were intimate with these people. Not just rape, like actual relationships. So, like, how do you navigate all that?
I don't know. You have to dig down in the well of Dr. Francis Cress Welsing to explain and the color theory, and it's really amazing the lust. And a lot of times we just talk about the women being raped, but then there were men raped and children raped. We just see lust. Other than intimate relationships that they had with each other, like maybe Thomas Jefferson and the Salem, it was just unadulterated lust. They just saw them as an opportunity to sexualize, and didn't care about it. That's one thing. Speaking of Frances Cress Welsing, when she talks about the origin of the MF word, here you are being raised by a black woman. She suckled you on her breast, and then you become a man, and then you rape her. You rape. How do you do that? How do you separate that in your mind? I don't know.
What was the significance of Pennsylvania's 1780 Abolition Act, and what did freedom truly mean in this context?
I want to buy your house. I can pay you cash for your house, no matter what condition.
And it's not just Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was one of the first colonies, states to have that type of law. But we see that throughout. You'll see that throughout the Caribbean. You'll see that in some places in Africa. And what they would do was, it's just little caveats, actually worked against the slaves. For example, it said that your child that is born after 1780 would be free. Okay, so you have this child that's free, and you're still a slave, right? So you don't get any provisions for that child. How do you feed that child? Right. So a lot of times it worked against them. So it was a system of what they call gradual abolition. And the British came up with the term apprenticeship, where they said we just can't set you free. You're gonna have to learn how to be free. And how do you do that? You're gonna have to work for a certain number of years before you are free. Right? So the way that law worked in Pennsylvania, it really only benefited a small number of people, but it extended the time that people were already enslaved in that period. And I thought you were going to ask about the police, because Philadelphia is very
we're going to get to that.
yeah, because your first police force, you know, once you set these, you have these free blacks floating around. You got to have somebody to police them, to watch them, right? And they didn't know who was free and who was a slave. So they would just arrest these black people if they were out past the curfew.
You needed employment.
You wouldn't even have anything. Your master would have to come and get you, or you would stay there, or you would be flogged or whipped in public. So it was a free-ish type of thing. You know, Philadelphia had the largest population of free blacks as we get into the 1800s. So history becomes a little different then. But,
What are the historical origins of policing in America, and how did, and I'm paraphrasing you referred to the law enforcement evolving into one of the most lawless entities in our society?
yeah, they were virtually lawless, and actually even today, because your early police were tasked with keeping order in a very chaotic, disorderly terrain, just to say. You have you look at early America, 1700s, 1800s, you have unfettered capitalism. You have all kinds of things going on that you don't have control over, like sewage. Very important. You got horses defecating in the streets. And so little things that were very large, housing. So you had not only black people were very dissatisfied, but you also had a lot of whites who were dissatisfied, you know, with the social conditions, and a lot of poverty, a lot of anger. And so the police force would just go out there, and they're supposed to keep these people under control. And we're in Philadelphia specifically, your early police officers were recruited from the gangs. So these people, one day they were gang warring on the street, the next day you put them in uniforms and tell them to keep order. And then you didn't have, today we have police academies, doing a little better. But I mean, they didn't have any training. You know, you just give them weapons and tell them to keep the peace. That's what they're supposed to, keep the peace. But how do you do that? And then you have racism, and not only racism, but particularly Philadelphia, you have a lot of ethnic fighting, you know, between the Italians, the Jews, the Germans. You got all this stuff going on. And people trying to protect themselves in their little areas. Right? So you have what we call turf wars. Right? So if you have police recruited from a certain community, they're going to try to protect that community. So are they keeping the peace, or are they just really another level of gang warring and protecting their turf? Right? So you have all of these things, and the firemen were even worse. They were worse than the police. And then you would have fights between the firemen and the police, and then the firemen would set things on fire and refuse to put them out. And here come the police. Oh, yeah. They had all kinds of things going on. But in Philadelphia, they even set fire to a little orphanage, a little black orphanage. And the fire people refused to put it out, and the police wouldn't make them. What makes you think about move, right?
Can you explain more about that incident with the orphanage?
Yeah, well, every time when we say riot all the way up to 1960, what we're saying is white people were coming into the black community and wreaking havoc.
Drinking warm water before.
And so in one of those instances in Philadelphia, you have whites coming into the black neighborhood and doing awful things, destroying. I read one account where they defaced the black church because they said black people make too much noise. and there was a coffin in there. They threw the coffin out the window, and then they set an orphanage ablaze. I don't know. There's no account about how many kids were killed or who got out. It just says the record says the orphanage was set ablaze, and then the fire people didn't put it out hastily. And then also those houses were wooden. They were burned very fast, and so yeah, it was a lot. So then you had the police caught in between that. So even if you have police officers who were truly trying to maintain the peace and try to maintain order, you were caught. I mean, it was just a lot of chaos going on at that time.
It seems like the police always started out as a lawless entity.
Basically still is. And a lot of that, I would say, is really the fault of the police, but the fault of policing.
Explain.
And yeah, because most of the rules that the police have to follow are crafted by the courts. And when does that happen? Usually after the fact, you know. So a lot of times they don't really know. I had an example. Now, New York is one of the first cities that if you want to sue the police officers have to actually pay instead of the city paying. Right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. And so I was in New York. Just casually, I would ask different officers about that, and none of them knew anything about it.
Not even up to date on it.
No. They said no, they didn't hear anything about it. They didn't know about that rule or what it meant either.
Well, that makes sense, though, because I'm pretty sure they have a high rate of lawsuits. I think Philly, last time I checked, they were like at 16 million since. It's like in a 2-year span.
I guess Los Angeles has the highest, but Philadelphia is not far behind.
Majority of them never make the news. Majority of the settlements and lawsuits.
Right. And even though we only have a fraction of the population that New York has in terms of brutality and students, we're almost part to that city. Mm-hmm.
All right. Can you explain how reparations were paid to enslavers at the end of slavery?
And you said at the end of slavery, and this is something very interesting. The British had paid their enslavers 20,000 pounds or whatever at that time. Well, the British government didn't have enough money to fully pay them. So that was part of the rationale for having the apprenticeship program, where they made the Africans work for a certain number of years after for free in order to pay back, okay? But actually, this is startling. The British government just balanced that payment in 2015.
Say that again, please.
They just balanced that debt in 2015. So we've all been paying reparations to the enslavers. Yeah, you had a Chase account, Barclays account. Right. Yeah, they just settled that score.
Did American enslavers receive any money when slavery was abolished?
No, you know why? Civil War. Because if the South had not attacked Fort Sumter and they had continued negotiations with Lincoln, because Lincoln's first plan was to send all the black people out with the American Colonization Society, and they had actually started sending people back to Africa, to Liberia, and then the black people enslaved those blacks once they got there. But the attack on Fort Sumter really did that. And then even with the Civil War, they lost everything. But then once Lincoln was assassinated, they were able to regain their property afterwards. So they didn't get reparations payments per se, but they were able to keep their holdings.
And can you share your thoughts on reparations?
It's a lot. It really is a lot. You know, when people talk about reparations, they basically think about a dollar. So the first point is, before you can even come up with a dollar, you need to know what happened. You know, And this is how the Jews won their case. They did thorough research on everything the Germans did in detail. So then they were able to be compensated based on that. And that's something we have not done. There's a lot of information on slavery going after, but we still don't have it in such a systematic fashion where we can get the numbers. Well,
I dare you to let me build you.
Professor Darity, and where's the UNC? He comes up with a number based on things, but I think a lot more research has to be done, and that's what HR 40 was about, was to provide money to do the research. Then we can come up with a dollar amount. And then also, like, I spent some time in Barbados, and in the Caribbean, they always talk about self-reparations. You know, when I first heard that, being a Black American, I was like, oh, it sounds like some Booker T. Washington, pull yourself up by your own bootstrap mentality. You know, what is this about? But then, you know, I really started listening to them and watching them, and they really have a point to the extent that we have to do some self-healing and some self-reflection and see who we are as people in order to enter this whole argument about reparations. And also, it's so expansive, the art, our education, our research. There's so many facets to reparations. Yeah, we're big time consumers. We spend $13 trillion a year, but that comes right out of slavery.
Explain.
Because we were nothing. We were not people. We were things. And the best account, speaking of Booker T. Washington, the best account is his book Up From Slavery. Because after slavery, he walked through the South and visited people in their home, talked to people. I guess it'd be one of the first sociological studies. And what he found is he would go into the home of a Black family, say a shack, go in, you know, they have nothing, maybe a little table or something. But you look in the corner and they'll have a brand new sewing machine or a set of china, right? Because these are the things that they saw that the whites had that gave them value. So then after slavery, this mindset, let me get these things so I can be something. And we're still plagued with that today.
Glad you brought that up, because Black people are always criticized for the consumption behaviors, but no one speaks about the origins of it, right, and how it's a lack of self-worth that pushes you to try to buy self-worth.
Yes.
You know? And once you understand and view it, you can see that's what's being done, but many people struggle with it, unfortunately.
Right. Personhood. That's the whole point of revolution. Is to, and John Henry Clark talks about this a lot, to become human. Get our human beingness back, our personhood back, which is part of reparations. And that self-reparations, becoming people, that we respect ourselves. So we have a little respect for ourselves. Definitely don't have, well, this is how it's explained to me. We have some respect for ourselves, but less respect for other Black people. You know, we can be very, very hard on other Black people.
Very hard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it makes sense too, man, because advertisers are really, I know a couple people in advertising, right? And the predatory practices that they have, specifically the campaigns against Black people, they're quite aware of that insecurity, and they know how to play off it. They know that the self-worth is not there, and I can trick you to believing you can buy it. And they have these high-end products for you to buy it. And it's a nasty trap, because the society teaches you to hate yourself. And the advertiser here is giving you the remedy for the self-hate, which is not beneficial to you.
Right. It's bad. And then you have your Black nationalists nationalist. I have a friend in advertising. He calls me the incense girl. He says you have a group of black nationalists, that burn incense all the time and wear the red, black, and green, and so they target us, with certain products, and then you have your average black, and I have a friend who she's ill, so she spends a lot of time watching TV. So when I go visit her, I watch TV with her. She loves all of these shows, The Housewives of Atlanta and Being Married to Medicine, and I'm watching these things. I know a lot of people. I don't know anybody who acts like that. I swear I don't. And then I'm looking at the clothes and the hair and the jewelry. And I'm like, these people are just so over the top, but you're watching this, and then this is what you identify. And in one scene, it was the Housewives of Huntsville or something. They had little children and their little girls who looked just like the mothers, with the same, the hair, the attitude, and so we're perpetuating, this very material persona onto people. Like this is what makes you. And then what the bad thing about it is, number one, okay, all these people have money, they all have bad attitudes.
It's what do I call it? White made black culture.
Yeah.
It's like what a white producer is kind of crafted as black culture, presented to their work.
But you're educated. That's what I understand. I ask my girl, I'm like, they have medical degrees, PhDs, MDs, and they're acting like this.
There seems to be a growing generational gap already, where many young people feel disconnected from their elders and even from themselves, right? I once heard you say, and I'm paraphrasing, many youth are crying out to be heard, feeling invisible, and seeking acceptance from those who may not value them. How can we begin to address this disconnect? And what role does historical awareness play in bridging this gap between generations?
That's $1 million question. And sadly enough,
Money.com, the opposite of any work.
NAACP on down to the neighborhood block association. How do we bridge that gap with young people? It's I really don't know. It's going to take. I think if we collaborated together, because I see some community projects, like some art projects, and where different people of different ages in a particular community will come together and work with young people and talk to people. That seems to get, but that's really at the micro level, and the larger realm. It's a lot, you try to educate them. So, shameless plug for my map. My project is what we call Digital Humanities Project, which you take a large amount of information and you put it together using technology. So what I did was to take all this information, not only on slavery folks, but the second map looks at anti-colonial and civil rights movements, and putting them together on a map, like a Google map, and have people go and open them so that they'll learn about each instance. And my target audience is really 15-year-olds, 15 to 25, young people, because they don't know the history of resistance. They don't, I don't think, because I can say, even when I was a teenager and I would hear about the civil rights movement, I get tired of hearing about Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks. I mean, like, how many times are you going to tell me this story? And I became bored, and I really didn't see the essence of the movement until I got much older and start really looking at their strategies, their tactics, how they networked, how they sacrificed, their courage, what they were up against. And I'm like, oh, okay. And by the time we get to 2050, the mark 2050, the majority of the population, the black population, are going to be around 25 years old and under. And at the trajectory we're going now, with this fascism and imperialism, they need to know resistance. And so that's why I put that up there, so you can learn about the role of culture and how do you mobilize people politically, you know? So I give each facet of that, how the leaders talk to people and how do you actually convince people to get involved? And I was laughing because now, of course, we're boycotting Target and other places, and I was saying, you know, black people going. Some of them are still going to the store and get things a lot. So, but during the 60s in the South, you had groups of people who were called enforcers, who would actually go stand in front of the store, and they would beat people up. Even women would beat other women if you're not going in there, you know, to maintain it. So when you hear all these stories and see all these things, and we see our past, we can become empowered. And I think that's what's missing, not only with young people, older people too. We don't know who we are. We don't know what we've been through. Right? And of course you can't move forward unless you Sankofa look backwards and see that. So I'm just hoping by people being more enlightened and educated on our history of resistance, that would help bridge the gap a little, help the young people have more respect for older people, and for older people to have more respect and patience for the younger people.
When did respect for older people start to decline?
I would say personally in my life, I would say during the 70s.
Why do you think?
Because once we started the Black cultural movement, you had, like my parents were in that generation, they were Negroes, you know, who wanted to integrate. The white man knows everything, you know, white man is close to God, and then here you are acting the opposite of that, you know. And we had so many tense moments and arguments, even in my own household. My father used to say, because I attended Lincoln University, my brother went to Cheney, he said, y'all used to be such good children till y'all went to that.
I ordered 200 hand-forged knives to my...
Say it like that, black school, you know. And I think that we couldn't understand it at the time. You know, hindsight's 20/20. I can understand my parents now, but how do you have respect for somebody like that?
Patience now, the older generation having patience with the younger generation. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I think we're too critical. We're too critical. We're critical in their music, the way they dress, the way they act. We make assumptions. And I do the same thing. I had a student come to class, typical stepping out of the housewives of Atlanta, you know, dressed like that, and the attitude. And so I automatically assume, you know, this young woman is not about too much. She was one of the most brilliant students I ever had. You know, and I just sized her up just by looking at her. Then once I really listened to her and got to know her and what she was saying, and what young people are going through today, the trauma. I visited one young girl while I was working at Camden High. She had a whole wall in her bedroom of funeral programs. You know, she wasn't 16. She had over well over 20 to make her cut the wall of her friends who had been killed. Yeah, so they have a lot on them. You know, it's a whole new world. A lot of trauma, a lot of drama, a lot of pressure to be. And unfortunately, you know, in this society, as I do this critique of capitalism that won't wait, And that's where you got that quote from. You know, whole thing about capital goal is alienation from yourself. So you don't know who you are, you know, and the further you move from yourself, then you can do anything to anybody else. You know, just 2 weeks ago in Chicago, this young man stomped this young girl to death. And you know what? First thing came to my mind, of course, I felt so bad for the girl. What happened to him? You know, what happened to him? What did somebody do to him for him to do that to somebody else? So I think these are the questions we have to start asking our young people. What happened to you? You know, and walk them through that and kind of bring them to a healing. And I think that too would bridge the gap. But I really do. I try to really listen to young people, just listen and watch and just really be empathetic.
You touched on it prior, but I'd like you to elaborate more. How does learning about one's identity impact a person on a deeper level, even a cellular level?
I don't know how you can navigate through the world and with other people if you don't have any concept of who you are. And unfortunately, most of the stereotypes of Black people are still out there. The criminalization of the race, and Black women, don't forget about it. No one likes a Black woman, not even Black women, you know. The stereotype of us being argumentative and negative. And so, I can't answer that. I don't know.
Have you observed this? Like, I observed this while I teach, right? You observe. Some Black people replicate what they think Black people should behave like. It's like they take the worst qualities, like they watch the show, and they're not like that. They're really not like that.
Yeah, right.
But they think the expectation is for them to act like that. So it's kind of tricky when you see people behave in a certain way. It's like they're putting on an act, but unfortunately, they're replicating the behaviors that's not the highest form of the culture. They feel pressured to act in a certain way because they feel like this is what it is to be Black.
We really see that on a global level. You know, it seems like, well, number one, racism is global. There's no way you can go where you don't deal with racism. So therefore, everywhere you have Black people, you have this level of inferiority. That's different based on where you are. But it really seems to me that Black people throughout the diaspora, throughout Africa and the African diaspora, they take the very worst of Black Americans, right, and amplify that. And I guess what you're saying is they think that that's a form of being accepted by others, and it's really interesting. But that's what we do. And but you've always had. And I tell students, you've always had free Blacks. You've always had a group of Black, and this is global. Always had Black people who were free. Also had some Black people who were educated, but the problem was miseducation, because what they would do is assimilate and inculcate the ways of whites in order to be accepted. But in doing that, what it does is it pushes them away from the people, because they think they look down at people and see that they're better than them. So you have these two classes. Years ago, this is funny, I was in London, and I went to a party that was thrown by some people from Ghana. And so when we got there, it was early in the evening, everybody was prim and proper. It was a lot of, they call barristers, and doctors, and whatnot. Everybody, here.
We're Phoenix Energy, a family-owned.
around 11 o'clock, the foo-foo came out, the music changed, the whole atmosphere changed. Everybody started to go back and being that their natural self. So it's navigating those two identities. And I really can't remember what the question was because I kind of went over the edge, but I was just thinking of just about different stereotypes and how they play out throughout the world. Mm-hmm.
And know how important it is to know yourself.
Oh, yeah, it's important. Well, but how do you do that? How do you do that? And you're being raised by people who don't know who they are, who were raised by people who didn't know who they were. So you have no one to teach you. Like, all you need really is one person in your life with some direction, or some people say with good sense. But if you don't have that, you don't have that connection, you learn as you go along. You learn from your peers, what you see on TV.
So I know you've been to both Jamaica and Ghana.
Oh, I never got that question.
What is up with the cultural similarities between those two?
Yeah, because we're all the same people. And this is something, there's this group, tying this back to reparations. There's this group in America called ADOS, African Descendants of Slaves. And they're pushing for reparations. But they're pushing it only for Black Americans who can prove that they were enslaved in America. They're missing out on a whole nother dynamic. What they don't understand is that during slavery, Black people were transported from place to place. Right? Barbados being the first real slave society, then up into Jamaica, South Carolina. Right? So you have these connections of this movement, and even after slavery, you have Black people being shuffled around and moved through these different areas. Now, a large majority of African people came through Ghana, right? But actually, another plug, Joseph Harris's map on the African diaspora, you can Google it, he shows all the places in Africa that Black people were taken from. But Ghana being a major point, right? Those people were taken to the Akan and Coromante, were taken to Jamaica, Barbados, South Carolina. They moved the same. So of course, yeah, you go to Ghana, you go to Jamaica, you're actually dealing with the same people. The same people. I know I went on a trip, I went to Bermuda once, and we had a guy there from the Congo. And once we got to Bermuda, the locals came out and they did a traditional dance. And he was like, that's the same dance that we do at home. He knew the dance, they knew the language, and then of course other people who have traced the language, especially of the Gullah, and the similarities with different groups in Africa. We're all the same people. But I think where ADOS and a lot of other Black people go off a little bit is we don't understand, and you're talking about a sense of self. We don't understand the sense of self that Africans have and people from the Caribbean have, because they didn't grow up in the belly of the beast. You know, when you're in an area and the majority of people around you look like you have a different attitude than living in a place of hostility, on a daily basis. You don't ask for it. You go into a store, people are following you. You've got this constant, and you don't have that there. I remember when I stayed in Tanzania for 6 months on a Fulbright. When I got back to New York and I landed at Kennedy Airport, and I saw all the white people, the rage, the stress, the rage, it came back like that. It was unbelievable. It is, and people don't understand that until they really leave. And I think 2 or 3 days in the islands when you're staying at an all-inclusive, you don't really get the feel of it. You know, you stay there a couple of weeks and you live with the people. It doesn't take long. You feel that weight coming off of you. You know, everywhere you look, you see black people, you see blackness. You know, and that gives you such a good feeling of self. And that's what people from the Caribbean have.
When you have a perfect...
And we think it's, oh, they think they're better than us. No, they have a sense of who they are.
And I think my parents are Canadian.
Oh, okay.
What I noticed is that growing up in America is that when you see people in authority that looks like you, it gives you a different person. Now, Jamaican is classic, very in colorism, very bad, right?
Right.
But you still see people in authority that look like you.
Yeah.
When you're constantly seeing people in authority who don't look like
Right.
you, it really messes with your psyche on a subconscious level. Because you don't feel subconsciously you could be in that position because you don't see it consistently.
Right.
That's one of the burdens of growing up in America as a black person, especially back in the day. You really typecast yourself because you don't, it's not even a thought for you to do that because you haven't seen it.
Right. Belly of the beast.
What would an educational curriculum that truly empowers our youth look like?
So that was one of the successes of the Black Power movement in the 70s, was instituting Africana studies programs in colleges and offering those classes, and then also infusing the curriculum in public schools. For example, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Detroit, Chicago, a lot of those places. Curriculums were designed to give black children a sense of self, beginning with commitment. It's a whole nother story, but that we're still fighting today, right? To take children back to Egypt and tell them that this is where your civilization began, and these people were actually African people who did that, and then bring them up. And we black scholars are accused of just trying to make people feel good. Yeah, we are. We're trying to make people feel good. When we go into the kings and queens of Africa, the whole pre-colonial African history, and then go into the enslavement, not only by the Europeans, but also by the Arabs. We don't usually talk about the Arabs and their infusion, and the devastation. We don't really look at the slave trade, we call it, but we don't really look at the devastation that took place in Africa. The population between 1500 and 1800 was almost, it was more than half. From people being taken out. Not only people being taken out, but out and out genocide. The slaughters of thousands of Africans were just killed. So going through that, and then coming. I used to teach Black history all the time, and the students ask, well, isn't there a happy period? Well, happy would be the Harlem Renaissance. That's about as happy as we can get. And even then, during the Harlem Renaissance, you still had a reign of terror going on. You got all these lynchings on the one hand, but at least you have all this art coming out of the Black community. So, just to really show Black people in their full glory, that we can do all under. Can you imagine where we would be and what our lives would be like if we weren't oppressed?
Yeah, because going back to the slavery in Africa, right, or the destruction of Africa, I don't think people understand how systems to sustain a society were destroyed. That's like a big aspect. And so this is like years and years of progress not being made because the system is destroyed. Your brightest and your strongest are removed from that environment. The trauma that was left behind, the ability to earn and develop is just decimated.
Right. The best account, of course, would be Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa.
Facts.
And also Eric Williams' Capitalism and Slavery. And you know the funny thing about that, because it's not funny. Of course, he became the prime minister of Trinidad. And during the Black Power movement, he had to ban his own book. Yeah.
Why? Who forced him to ban his own book?
He had to. Because it was too empowering, you know?
Drinking warm water before bed improves.
You know, he had that consciousness when he wrote the book, but, you know, as a governor, you're trying to repress this Black Power thing. Yeah, he banned his own book.
Studying slavery, right? So there's this idea, like, you're really not supposed to complain about your history. You're supposed to move on, right? But when you analyze even the slave ship, how traumatic that is, and like being disoriented, because not only are you removed from your life, but like the crying, the feasting, the beat, the death, even the food, even exposed to like foreign food, like it's just such like a mind-blowing experience that people don't want to acknowledge or think about.
Well, it's changing a little bit now, because now we're talking about trauma. And of course, Joy DuBois, forgot her last name, Leary, her book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, which she was a little ahead of her time, because we're just starting to get that way and looking at the impact of trauma, generational trauma on people. And well, and this was one of my inspirations for doing the slavery vault map, because as a Black person, we are shrouded in shame. You're in a predominantly white classroom and you get to the topic of slavery and all the white students look at you, like you're still a slave. All that trauma is still with you. And I wanted to say, look what we did. Look how we fought. Look how we strategized. Look at the genius in all of this.
And I wanted to bring up, right? So when everyone talks about epigenetics, right? They just seem to focus on like the negative things we inherit. But when I think about when I started to understand epigenetics, right? And say, yes, I may have inherited that. Right? But what about all these other things I inherited? The resilience, the brilliance, courage.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I put on in the narrative for the map. That the same DNA that ran through our ancestors is in us.
Right.
You know, we can do this. We are empowered. We need to know who we are. We need to stand up. They did under extraordinary
Because I never heard about this list of solitude, right? And you know, even hearing that got me fired up.
People like Solitude. Also, Marie Angelique in Montreal. People like her too. I forget the year, but maybe around 1830s. She overheard her master say he was going to sell her because of her attitude. So she set Montreal on fire. Tried to burn down the whole city. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they captured her and tortured her, but she did a lot of damage. So, yeah.
I really appreciate the conversation, sharing the information and the wisdom. And let the people know about your project, too.
Yes, I would like to steer everyone to my website, Black Slave Revolts with an S, one word, blackslaverevolts.org. Okay? And you can also go to DrIfeWilliams.com, but blackslaverevolts.org, and you will see it's 2 maps now. I just finished, hot off the press. It's only 2 weeks old. Yeah, it's 90% done, but it's live. You'll see 2 maps, one on the slave revolts And then my new one is anti-colonial, like I mentioned, civil rights movements from 1944 to 1994. But what I realized after I started is you can't talk about 1944 unless you go back to 1934 and all the labor movements. And so I start with the labor movements, the role of the Communist Party, especially with the Scottsboro Boys. They were Marcus Garvey. And I always ask people, how many chapters do you think Marcus Garvey had? He had over 1,240 different countries.
Which is wild.
And he still has active chapters. One in Costa Rica, and I know one in Namibia. I don't know about others, but there are active chapters of his movement. And of course, the largest,
I want to buy your house. I can pay you cash for your house, no matter what condition it's in. If you need to sell your house for any reason,
the two largest transnational movements would be the anti-apartheid movement and the Black Power movement. And you have Black Panthers in Israel, in India, in Australia, in East Timor. So I have all that on the map. And it's color-coded red, black, and green after Honorable Marcus Garvey. And each marker not only gives you information, but it gives you, I'm into visuals. So they have images, I have video, and then at the end of each one, I have citations, scholarly citations. Because I don't want anybody to think, this is just a Google map. I can just hit something. I want to maintain the integrity of the academic work and scholarship behind it.
How many years did you have to research to get this going?
Well, the slavery map, I would say maybe 8 years, because I was working on other things. In between, I did my book, Police Brutality, A Philadelphia Story. I put that little plug in. And, and work, and I just kept putting it down. And then right before the pandemic, I don't know, ancestors told me, come on, girl, you need to finish this thing. Finish this right now. And I just focused right on it. So, and when I start focusing, I would say maybe less than a year. And I got that together. And then I put it online in African Heritage Studies Association website right at the beginning of the pandemic. And I got over 236,000 views. So, and I don't know how people found that. And of course, the Smithsonian found it, and they wanted the ships. They just wanted the ships for their international exhibit, which Trump is presently going to close. I don't think he knows anything about it, but it's phenomenal in that they not only talk about slavery, they do what they call object pairing. They're comparing what happened in slavery and what's going on now. So I knew that one was going to come down. So they have slave shackles and handcuffs. And so, so they took the ships, and that's presently on display at we call it the Blacksonian, that they're trying to close. That's going to be there in June, and it's going to travel throughout the world.
Can you, since you brought it up, can you explain some of the similarities between slavery and our modern day society?
It's a big question. I mean, it's a lot. We look at the criminal justice system. We talked about self-image and hating ourselves and not being people. The terms of lack of education, our housing, our health. It's just in Barbados. This is my favorite place. I guess you will. It's my second favorite place. They grew up eating sugar cane because they didn't have any food. And one guy told me that, his lunch was a bag of sugar, right? And Barbados today has the highest rate of amputees from diabetes. So, I mean, it's directly related to high blood pressure, the hypertension. I came across an interesting fact that Black people in America have higher blood pressure than people living in a refugee camp. Can you imagine that?
And do you think it's the food or the stress?
It's the stress.
Definitely.
it's the stress and I mean, we're under constant, and it's just on a subtle level. You know, you mentioned the colorism, and it's a lot.
What do you say to people that say black people have made a lot of progress?
Well, we have. It depends on how you look at it. Okay, a lot of time has passed. A lot of time, and if we look at where we should be in terms of the clock, we have not really progressed that much. But then again, if you look at it from where we were captured and oppressed to where we are now, then it looks like, and you know what's amazing is look at the period of history right after slavery. So between like 1868 and 1920.
That was a booming time.
You're talking about people coming from almost 99% illiteracy.
At Houston Christian University.
Right? With rags on a plantation, and you look at them in the 1920s, the hats and the genius and the writing and the art, and that period of time.
Access and opportunity, you know?
Yeah. It's amazing how so we gotta look. I try to look at things globally, you know, and
what's the most shocking thing you found doing your research that really, like, man, blew you away?
there was a lot of shocking things. There was a lot. But one thing that, well, of course, the punishments and all, but with the second map, with the civil rights movement, and I ask people this now, I said, what's the longest boycott during the civil rights movement? And everybody say the same thing. Montgomery bus boycott, 382 days, right? I found a boycott led by high school students in Orlando, Florida, that lasted 3 years. Yes, every day after school, they would go to the lunch counter and they'd sit down. As soon as they get there, the waitress would take the sign down, closed. And they would just sit there. And then they get up to go home and she put the sign back. 3 years. They were even arrested and held for $250 bail each. You imagine? And at that time, and the community raised the money, got them out of jail, and they went back. It took 3 years till 1963 for them to integrate that lunch counter. I thought that was so amazing, and I also like the enforcers. I like the idea of them beating people up. But it's just, you know, I was looking at the maps yesterday and I was thinking, there are so many stories, so many, and I just really caught.
Now,